When we were chatting earlier, you mentioned that it's important not to automate manual operations, but rather modify operations to leverage automation. I think this is a really important point that sets the stage for our discussion today. Can you elaborate a little bit more behind that?
That is, one of the aspects I've seen a lot of mistakes made through my career is, people look at a manual operation and they say, okay, we want to automate it. And what I found is, one, manual operations were developed and designed to optimize using people to handle them. When you try to automate those, that becomes a very costly way to do it. And, the better approach is to rethink those processes to leverage the benefits of automation.
Great. So a client comes to you and they've been given a task to automate something. Maybe that mission came from a boss, or maybe that they self-imposed that they have this automation desire. How do you help them navigate the different candidate processes that may have? What would be a first good piece of advice for them to get started?
Many times, um, you ask them to take a step back, and because sometimes they'll come to you, all right, we want to do this, we want to automate this, and you end up asking them, okay, I understand that you want to, but why? Why did you pick that specific operation? Is what are you trying to achieve? So many times they may say, okay, maybe they want to reduce costs, or maybe they want to improve their delivery of something. And getting back to all right, what are you trying to achieve? And then let's take a step back and find the best way to do that to achieve the objective you're going for versus going right towards a specific technology. I want to implement this new widget that we saw online.
Have there been situations where a customer has approached you with an idea to automate a process and you had to gently let them know that either that might not be the best first place to start, or that idea required an overhaul?
Yeah, many times, and because many times, let's say that they may even go to a trade show or something and see a specific technology, and I want that. And many times you have to then go through the education process. Like, okay, that's a great technology. Let's look at your operations and see if that's going to perhaps provide you the best return on investment, or maybe there's an alternative that may be better. And again, it all comes back to a bit of that educational aspect.
Without naming any names,
Sure.
can you provide a concrete example of that? Or do you notice that there are certain, in your experience over the years, are there concrete examples of where customers you've seen routinely maybe start to go down the wrong path and automating a process that may not be the best place to start, or um, attempting to automate without taking certain considerations in mind?
Yeah, and the probably the best example always is um, where a customer has a manual operation, and let's say, hey, we currently go down the aisles and we pick items and go from location to location to pick those items. We want to automate that. Okay. Well, if you tried to automate that process, you would try to replicate exactly what they're doing. But the more conventional approach, or let's say that the approach that has a better ROI, is leveraging automation to do goods to person. So a goods to person type of automation approach, no one would ever do that manually. No one is currently having someone go to a location, grab a box, bring it to someone else to pick an item out and then bring it back. No one's doing that manually for good reason. It's not efficient. But that's probably the best example of where you change the process to leverage automation.
If their manual process currently achieves the same end, the means that they're doing to achieve that end are drastically different.
Exactly. The process is different. You're what's the goal? So, hey, we have many different SKUs that we need to fill in an order and ship out a box. Okay. So let's look at the available technologies, if you will, to do that as efficiently as possible.
What are some considerations that our listeners should take that may not be as obvious when it comes to now automating a process that is currently manual?
I think the challenge that you can never underestimate is the impact on people with the process. Many times when people look at automation, they focus on the specific technology. But there's other considerations. Many times it's IT, which has become, a lot of customers are much more cognizant now of all right, what are the software considerations we need to implement this. There's also the ongoing support and maintenance. That is something that you need to factor in as well. But at the end of it, it's really going to be your staff internally that's going to make this technology work or not work. So making sure that they're on board, and I'll say, involved in that education process, that's going to be your best barometer, or have the biggest impact on the success of the solution at the end of the day. Whenever you have an automated system that needs to consider um, interfacing with manual operations, completely different dynamic, completely different considerations, and the relative complexity goes up. And I think that's why you also see a lot of the solutions gravitating towards more restricted areas and fenced areas, because it reduces the number of the amount of variability, and with that reduction of variability also improves performance. So that's the greatest challenge. Many times there's technology, let's say in the mobile area, where all the sensors are there to be able to work in an environment that also is interfacing with manual operations, but there is a performance trade-off. Um, and that's the thing I think a lot of customers are now struggling with, or questioning. You know, with the performance trade-off, are there things that we can do perhaps to change the process to improve that performance, to avoid some of that interaction? Is that interaction really necessary? I think is a question that should always be asked.
You touched on something there with respect to mobile automation, which I think can be very counterintuitive because it seems at face value that it is easier perhaps to just drop a couple vehicles and automate what is currently a manual process, and maybe it works and you actually implement it and there's a go live and there's a handoff and all that. And that seems easier than planning with intention a whole, a self-contained automated environment where you have to clear out the old racking, put new stuff in, all this big project, right? But you have the complexity here now of these vehicles operating in this mixed fleet, the mobile automation, and there's traffic jams, or now to your point, there are performance hits
Right.
that were not planned for. So yeah, to talk to our listeners here about that because it seems so easy to just drop a couple vehicles in, but there's a little more to it than that for it to be successful.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. A lot of analogies with this. Penny wise, dollar foolish, and patchwork quilt, and I've seen them all, and many times, you know, customers they'll say, "Hey, we want to have an introduction into we want to do a small pilot." You know, and I think that's advisable, and everybody's intentions are well intentioned. The challenge comes, do you start creating this patchwork quilt? And do you not, frankly, get the performance? Your pilot failed not because of the technology, but because you put it in a position that it was never going to be successful. And now you got this bitter taste in your mouth on technology that, frankly, may not be justified, that it had nothing to do with the technology. It had everything to do with not putting it in an application where it could be successful.
Yeah,
I think that's always a
I've seen this personally time and time
right.
again, where maybe it's a great candidate process for automation, but for it to function like a well-oiled machine, might require 8 vehicles. Oh, but the pilot, we're going to start with 2. But those 2 vehicles will never be successful, right? Because they're going to be competing with manual
Right.
operations and everything else going on, and it will just fall a bit short. So something that I keep in mind is, okay, is there a way to pare the ambition of that scope down to now a 2 vehicle scope, where it's always better to automate 100% of what you can, as opposed to doing too much with manual operation. They're competing with the automation.
Exactly. And again, the best ROI is going to be automating 100% of a process. If you start to automate a percentage of the process, you now have double the cost, really. Because you're probably going to still have to require all of the manual, resources in play to handle 50%, if you will. But now you have automation handling 50%. In some degree, you increased your cost. You just really not going to see the benefit of it.
Now, there are some advancements that we've seen in software that does more dynamically allow for manual operations and automated systems to collaborate, without stepping on one another's toes. But still, I do fully agree that if you can automate 100%, it's always going to be the best.
Right.
But where the flexibility of maybe some intelligent software could come in is, let's say you have a peak that occurs,
Yes.
you know, not 1 month out of
Supplement.
supplementing something, and then being able to then have the automation work alongside manual operations. Planning for that peak is important,
Right.
but it shouldn't be, you know, daily business or hourly business if you can avoid it.
And again, it needs to be, again, thoughtful and planned. And all right, here's how we're going to handle the peaks. Here's how it's going to work. And, at the same time, um, trying to ensure that it doesn't come at the detriment of the performance.
So when deploying automation, you do have manual operations, the human element that has an interface. It could be upstream of the automation. It could be downstream. It could be working alongside the automation in parallel, or coexisting with the automation in completely unrelated processes, but they're in the environment, right? All the different combinations, but there are interactions. So what are some things that our listeners should understand about that complexity before, deploying automation?
I always, you look at, you want to decouple that as much as possible in terms of the potential for manual interaction to impact the performance of the automation. And interdependencies, there's always going to be some, but you always want to minimize those. A good example is, I have multiple workstations. You want those, and I have operators at each of these workstations. You want to minimize as much as possible any dependence between those workstations, because now you could have one operator slowing down your entire operation, which, again, a lot of customers, you know, deal with this and understand it clearly in their manual operations. Just need to be cognizant of that when you automate as well. That m- Try to decouple them as much as possible so that one person can't impact the performance.
So these considerations are primarily performance motivated. Would it be fair to say that there's some safety benefit from safety as well, or do you feel where we are with safety standards, as they're adopted in North America, that, you know the coexisting of the automation is adequately covered by adhering to those norms and standards?
I think the safety standards are doing a good job, frankly, of keeping up. But as the technology keeps changing and the applications keep changing, it's requiring everyone to always take a fresh look at them. And then, many times it does impact performance, which then, to overcome that, many times it'd be a different approach. That, okay, to handle it this way requires these safety standards. which are all good. Um, but it comes at a cost of this performance. Can we change this to remove that safety challenge and increase our performance?
Like you mentioned, the move to a restricted zone,
Exactly.
higher performance, does not have to operate at a reduced speed or greater clearances, things like
Yeah.
that.
So it addresses the safety, and at the same time improves performance.
So we have the pleasure of operating in a world where we have duplicate sets of standards, right? There we have the ISO standards, which many of our customers do follow and ask that, and integrators and manufacturers do follow, and also the local ANSI standards, B56.5 and so forth. So I was going to ask you, in your experience, you have you're very multinational, working with stakeholders, whether customers or manufacturers in the Americas and Europe and Asia. Um, how's that experience been for you navigating? What have been some of the challenges? And the standards had me thinking about this too. Obviously, that's one of the challenges, right? But some thoughts on that, and anything else that comes to mind.
It's interesting with the standards and everything else, because like in Europe there's CE, which is again more self-certification, if you will. But even outside of the safety standards, I've seen differences across all of them. Asia versus Europe versus here, and it's difficult even to just narrow into the standards because the applications are different. Side loading trucks versus back loading trucks, Euro pallets versus a GMA pallet, different labor uh, safety aspects. That there's different requirements in different countries for ergonomics and things of that nature. So I think the biggest aspect to me is you have to adapt, and I would say that goes not only from countries, but many times even within a country, there will be different standards in different states. There will be different standards by customer, and for all of those, you know, every company I think needs to be able to adapt to accommodate those standards, because they're all well intentioned, if you will. So, we can look at it as an integrator, oh, all these different barriers, but there's good reason that companies have them, or want them implemented and want them followed.
You spent the majority of your career at the manufacturer or integrator, wearing those hats. But there was a period of time where you actually worked as part of a third party logistics company, HK Logistics. So a little bit on the other side of the fence, if you will. Curious how that experience informed your current perspective.
Yeah, and it was a very good experience. Again, many times on the integrator side, your scope is a project. That, hey, we're going to put this project in, and it's up to the customer to operate it, and off you go. Working for HK Logistics, well, we're now the company. We're now operating it. Um, so much more focused on the labor aspect of, okay, the ergonomics, the labor, the day-to-day, the operational considerations that need to be included in the system. So that experience definitely got me much more focused on uh, the nitty-gritty, if you will, of the day-to-day. All right, how is this going to work every day? And not only that, this is always a big aspect of uh, what do you do when things don't go right? And that's that's operations, daily task every day of, all right, the printer's not working, the so and so called in sick. How are you going to be able to adapt to keep things running when those things happen?
Did that experience help shape your definition of what success looks like?
Yeah, that's a very poignant observation. Yes, absolutely. Um, you know, sometimes before you would say success is, hey, the project went live or the system went live. It was success. Now I would say success is probably measured further after that. Um, to me, many times I view success, frankly, of if a customer does another project, then you can say that that first project was a success. So probably a little bit more runway on when I consider a project a success, because it just takes longer.
Yeah. Absolutely. Some of our listeners today, well, some of them may actually be evaluating automating a greenfield environment, a new construction, but I think fair to say many of our listeners have an existing framework, existing buildings, building columns where they are, processes are what they are for now, personnel are there. So, what would you tell these listeners about things that they need to keep in mind as taking a first step into automating a brownfield?
I think brownfields are always more challenging, primarily, um, because you don't want to get into this square peg round hole thing. But there are more and more technologies out there that uh, are suited for brownfield. They're not, it's always a cost factor. Um, Many times the ability to adapt to a brownfield environment comes at a higher cost point uh, for various reasons, but it's not insurmountable. The biggest challenge, and I think this is true with most technologies, whenever there's a brownfield application, many times the first question is, how tall is the facility and how bad is the floor? Kind of the top and the bottom. And
And is there anything the vehicle will hit along the way?
yeah, exactly.
Any low clearances? Yeah.
But normally it's normally the biggest barrier is going to be the floor. And I've seen a lot of customers that know that, recognize that, and it's something that they know they should have fixed the floor years ago, but they didn't have to because in the manual environment they were able to overcome it. Um, but that's typically the biggest thing that, all right, if you really want to do something, you're going to have to address the floor.
Yeah, for sure. So back to the technology, we touched upon that topic a little bit earlier, but you're a tech guy. Yeah, fair to say. Uh, what are some technologies, whether they be navigation or safety related, or perhaps on more on the software side, fleet management, so on and so forth, that you think that are on the horizon that you find exciting, and that will be more than just something for a demo, actually meaningful technology.
So I'll go both sides. Um, I know the humanoid bots are novel when people see them.
We get a big draw at the trade shows.
Exactly. I question the relative practicalness of them, only because they're able to handle a level of complexity and associated costs then, which I just don't know if is necessary. So that's one extreme. On the other side, um, I personally really like the direction I see more systems going with. And again, I won't, it doesn't even need to be a fenced environment. We'll call it a restricted environment. That the ability for equipment to run in a restricted environment to get the performance benefits, but now having the safety vests, or again, it can be a vest, it can be a manual truck, these different technologies that enable manual operations to work in that restricted area when necessary. um, so it kind of best of both worlds. I have a restricted area where I'm getting the benefit of better performance, but I still have a means to introduce manual operations with software and safety aspects in it when necessary. I think that's kind of best of both worlds, if you will. Whenever you try to truly uh, have manual and automated things, regularly interact, logically, you're going to have a performance hit on it. And I just always, it's always going to impact the ROI. And do you get the benefit of it? Everybody, of course, is very keen into AI, and the benefits of that, and the software benefits of that. Um, I think we're going to see the benefits of that from a repeatability, reliability standpoint in all the technologies. So I think that's going to definitely provide a very strong incremental benefit across the board. And with that as well, potentially also helping with forecasting and planning.
Certainly the planning to
It-
today,
right,
right?
right,
It's already
right.
very helpful.
Exactly. In the next couple of years, I think a lot of the gains there are probably they're going to move fairly rapidly, really, just because I think that's how the curve's going to go.
Do you think that certain industries are going to see these technologies adopted more readily than others? And if so, which ones?
I think manufacturing. I think distribution and not just you know cutting steel manufacturing. I would say manufacturing support, work in process, the delivery of materials to assembly lines, the taking of materials from assembly lines, and manufacturing has that repeatability aspect with it. So I think the material movement within manufacturing is probably going to move very rapidly, especially as we see more, we'll call it reshoring and investment in manufacturing.
If you could give an operations leader today, a listener today, one piece of advice before they embark on their automation journey, perhaps they're still in the planning stage. What would that one piece of advice be? I know you've given a lot of advice
No, no,
today,
no,
but
no, no.
we're gonna restrict you to one now, Troy.
So I'm known for this phrase as well. I think the best key or the best thing to ensure success within an automated project is to go into it with the perspective that Murphy was an optimist. That, and it goes back to the planning that when you look at these projects, if you plan and understand all the things that could potentially go wrong, your probability of success is going to be quite high. So I just never want someone in operations to go into something naively believing it's just going to work. If it does, outstanding. Call it a win and go away happy. But I think just going into it, trying to consider and be cognizant of, all right, what are we going to do when this happens? What are we going to do when this happens? Um, your success is going to go up exponentially.
You are known for another phrase as well.
Okay.
Don't pave the cow path,
Yes.
which I'm going to steal.
Yes, yes, yes. So, looking at the phrase, paving the cow path, if you kind of visualize that, cows, have their natural path and it may weave and wander as they go from the field to the barn, if you will. And, you don't want to pave that because the cows took the path that was most appropriate for them. And more than likely, it's not a straight line. So when we look at automation, I think we really want to look at that straight line that, hey, we're going to make an investment here to put a straight path all the way to the barn versus taking the winding road that the cow did because it was the best path for them.
But essentially, back to what we discussed at the very beginning, which is those who automate processes, manual processes, without re-optimizing them, modifying them with automation in mind. So we'll do a monologue. Like I'll record a monologue and an outro, like independent. So we just get straight into the
Y- You know,
interview.
I,
Spare.
my advice for anybody, and again, this is what I do or I would do, is you know have this master plan, if you will, that a master plan for your facility, so that you, when you're making incremental improvements, you know you're going in the right direction. And even in a brownfield environment, I personally believe that if you could have a clean sheet of paper, hey, what would you do? And recognizing, hey, you know what? Uh, because we're in a brownfield environment, we may not be able to do these things, but you may be able to get 70% there. And at least when you're making those steps, you know you're making them in the right direction. Because just so often, seeing, small, well-intentioned, point solutions fail, for lack of a better term, just not achieve the results they want, because they weren't implemented with a bigger perspective. So, and anybody who wants to implement automation, um, I would just always advocate, take a step back and identify, hey, if we could do anything, this is what it would look like, so that when you make those incremental steps, you know you're walking in the right direction.